Welcome to another Proline Academy session in our series for Strata Council members. As you may know, if you've been to these sessions before, my name is Catherine Squires-Basson. I'm the Director of Culture and Community here at Proline Management, and I'm happy to have you join us for another session of learning things. As you also may know, we offer a number of different opportunities for learning, both for our Strata Council members and residents and owners in our Strata communities. The Academy sessions, as today is, are presented by our own Strata property managers and team members, sometimes with guest speakers like we have today. And these sessions dive deeper into specifics around how Strata corporations and communities function. And they are geared to councils and sometimes also community members, depending on the content. If you have any questions or suggestions, there's always a survey at the end, which we love giving your feedback on. It's really helpful, and we read all the comments. But if you have any other suggestions, you can always reach out to me via email. My email is where you received the invitation in the first place, so I should be easy to find. It's just Catherine@prolinemanagement.com. Also, we always get asked, today's session is being recorded, and we will send a link out to everyone who is registered once the recording has been processed. It takes a few days. There will also be time for questions at the end of the presentation. So please use the Q&A function, not the chat. I was just making sure I was unmuted. Every once in a while, you second guess yourself. Please use the Q&A function, not the chat, to type in your questions so that everyone can see your question and they can all be addressed really smoothly in the process at once. You can also, if you need to chat to us, chat to the hosts directly. And so if you have any questions or issues, feel free to reach out to me directly. One last thing, another question that gets asked a lot. This is a webinar, so no one can see or hear the attendees. Only the presenters will be on screen, so you can relax. And I think that's everything for now. I'm going to hand it over to Christy Tambiri, one of our Strata property managers and one of our managing brokers and one of the managers of our Strata team, to introduce today's speakers.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. So I'm pleased to introduce today Jesse Robinson, who is a Proline team member. He's our site services dude, along with Steve Bailey, the owner of VERSATECH. VERSATECH does a ton of work with Proline properties, and so we're in good hands. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to let them take off here. And as Catherine said, we will have a Q&A session at the end, and I'll be back to help move through those questions. So over to you guys.
Thanks very much. And thanks for joining, everybody. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Catherine. I'm thrilled to be able to do this. And just for everybody watching, a little bit about my CV. I've been with Proline for 7 years now and working in site services, working with new buildings and working with these kind of specific issues at our properties. Prior to that, I was a concierge manager at a property that is still managed by Proline. And prior to that, I ran movie theaters. So I have while I have a fair amount of training through the course of business, I have a lot of practical experience, and most of what you're going to see are a lot of the real practical, tangible lessons that have been learned through the years dealing with frontline security. Every great seminar starts with a Dilbert cartoon, but that's the one that I like to start with. Security is more important than usability. In a perfect world, no one would be able to use anything. And of course, you see the result of that. What I'm trying to show here, though, is, as awesome as that cartoon is that it is possible to have a completely usable building, property, strata, and still be very, very secure. But it does take some really key elements. And identifying those elements is what we're here to do. So the building blocks, there are 3 major components that contribute to security of a property. The first is the one that you have the least say in, which is the design, the aesthetic, the actual structure, and the location of your property. You don't have a lot of say in this, and anything that you can change is incredibly expensive to change. So really it is the property, the building that you have. The next, you do have a fair bit of say in, but again, it's still what comes with that property, which is the technology itself. Do you have an access control system? Is your building keyed? What kind of camera system? Does it have a camera system in it? What type of doors on the exterior are you dealing with? What type of doors do you have on the interior? Everything that contributes to the flow of that property. That is what we're talking about there. The last is your largest controllable, which is the culture. And that is the culture of security within the building. That is the residents, the ownership, the tenants. How does the traffic flow through that property? Is there a public component? What are the usage habits? And what are the behaviors? So getting into the other side of it, what are the primary targets at a residential property? Well, first and foremost, right now, number one has to be parcel thefts. At least at condominium properties that are buildings, maybe a little different if we're talking about a townhome complex, but parcel thefts definitely right now are number one. So we'll talk about mail security shortly. Storage locker break-ins are right there too. And that's one of the things we'll talk about also is obscuring storage locker rooms. They're a major, major target. Bike thefts with the advent of e-bikes, huge target for that. Of course, most people that have e-bikes, they definitely don't want to keep it in a bike room, but these do happen. Vehicle break-ins. You'll see, interestingly, that's down the list. In the old days, vehicle break-ins were number one. But one of the key things with a vehicle break-in, this will tie into a later point, is once you break into a vehicle, you're on the clock because the alarm will go off. And virtually all modern vehicles have alarms. So they're more difficult the big thing with thieves is they want something that they can do quietly and unseen. So we'll talk about methods to counter that. The next is kind of the basic exterior graffiti and vandalism. And common area and outlet access. But you will note that within the primary targets, units, residential units, and even commercial units are not listed there. And one of the reasons for that is by 7 years of dealing with Proline and all of our properties, all kinds of petty crime. I honestly don't know if I've ever heard of more than one, maybe two instances of a unit break-in. And the reason is that the petty crime that is so common nowadays, they are looking for something quick and to get out. You break into a unit and the charges are very severe and they know that. And just a quick anecdote to that point, we had a very high-end building in downtown that was brand new. We were literally just waiting for the hardware in the parkade to be bolstered by a locksmith. So installing astragals, lever guards, all of that. And somebody managed to get into the parkade just in that short amount of time after just a few people had moved in. And they broke into every single door in the parkade, all the maintenance rooms, storage rooms, all of that, except for the 3 private garages that were for units up top. The reason they didn't go into those was because the doors on those private garages were identified by unit numbers. They thought that they were going to be breaking into units, when in fact, all of them were full of items that were going to be moved into the upstairs units because they hadn't moved in yet. So that was a pretty good delineator of what the priority is. It's a high priority to get into a parkade, into a storage room, and it is definitely a high priority to stay out of a unit for the vast majority. Now, I don't want you to all to think that that means that residential security is not front and center for us. It absolutely is. It's a basic necessity. But the concern about security will be in your parkade, your common areas, and lower down. So design, let's talk about the least controllable aspect. Number one least controllable is the location of your property. There are obviously huge differences in the security concerns of a downtown property versus something in Sydney. Choice of doors and hardware is another very, very big one. We want to be on the lookout for doors that can't be brute forced. So when we see levers on lever act, which is code, I want to be clear, this is not against code. This is completely code. I wish they would change it, but levers on maintenance and common rooms is completely code. But we want to bolster that with a lever guard because they can be brute forced. We want to see on the exterior of buildings doors that are flush with a wall. They don't have an alcove. I'm sure many of you have seen downtown where you'll have a exit door from a business that's a little alcove, and it will be a gathering point for the street element. Parkade ramp and gate. This is another thing that's not very well known, which is a long parkade ramp is an incredibly effective device to keep people out of your building. A lot of the issues we have with parkade entry are gates that are right against the street, storefront gates, I call them. Whereas if you have a long ramp, there's nowhere for them to hide on a ramp that you won't see them and then get in behind you. So they've got to cover a lot of real estate to be able to get down to that gate before it closes. But of course, all of that can be alleviated if you wait for the gate to close. Mail area location and parcel lockers is, again, a huge one, which we'll cover shortly. Fire egress plan and exits. Now, fire security should not be affected at all by your fire egress. That's all covered by what kind of doors you have and all this, but you may have certain changes in the building that the that fire inspector does prior to occupancy that changes things. For instance, I know a building where they had to put a fire exit through a storage room. They had no choice. And it greatly compromised the security of that. So they had to alarm the door and do all of these things. Storage and bike room location layouts. I can't overstate the importance of obscuring storage and bike rooms. Out of sight, out of mind. Same thing with parcel areas. If you can't see it from the street, if you can't see it from common areas, it's like it doesn't exist. So we'll get to strategies for that. Lighting design is another one, making sure that your common areas outside are properly lit, especially if they're covered by CCTV. Now, technology is where I'm going to bring Steve in here, who is easily one of the, not to blow you up too big, Steve, but easily one of the best installers in the city. And what we want to talk about here is fob access systems, interphone systems. What are some of the modern choices we have here today? CCTV and DVR, so that's closed circuit television and digital video recorders, and how those differ from previous systems and what you can do with them. And then what it takes to retrofit an outdated system. So Steve, as far as fob access systems, can you speak to some of the options that stratas and residential buildings have nowadays, between that and interphone systems as well?
Sure. It's a big topic, so I hope you'll help steer me here, Jesse, as we get into it.
Yeah.
So fob access systems, most new buildings, especially if they're downtown, they tend to get put in right off the bat. But they can be anything from just one or two, the main entry doors on the outside of a building, right up to buildings where they control, every floor of the building, every common room, every area. That is, as you said before, it depends a lot on location and the developer and how they view security as a priority to make the units attractive. So yeah, it's the systems that we are involved with are typically they're more advanced commercial systems. So they're fully have all the features, meaning that everything is sort of, all the doors are hardwired together to a central location, and they run on a software platform that makes it easy for you to program the fobs, give very specific access to different people who have different requirements. For example, the garbage company might just get into the parking gate from Monday to Friday from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Obviously, a resident would have 24-hour access, but you can control which storage rooms, bike rooms they can get into. So you're just you're just trying to really, as finitely as you can, control where people go to just reduce security risks. And also they track all of those events. So every time a fob is used, it's stored in the event log. And if something goes, for example, missing from a bike room, you can go back and look at all those times and days that fobs were used and use it as a starting point to try and track down what might have happened. So yeah, they're very flexible. They're very easy to use. And they're always the sort of proximity type now. You just kind of tap your fob within an inch or two of the card reader to let yourself in. So they can be very convenient. And Also convenient for people with sometimes who have disabilities or, have trouble working keys and locks and pulling, things. So, and they also interface with auto door openers, which is another thing that is on more and more buildings, not only for convenience, but also to meet, disability needs and the laws that exist around that now, making those available to tenants. So, they're very flexible. They can be very simple from just say the front door, maybe the front and back doors, right up to much more finite. What we usually say to people when they're considering where to consider an access control is, or a fob on an access control room, is the number of people that you have to issue keys to. So if it's, maybe the number is somewhere around, 10 keys, it really depends. But if you have a mechanical electrical room that really maybe just one service provider, Proline and the Strata, president needs the key to, it's probably not as worthwhile an investment to put a fob on a door like that. It's the key can be very controlled, limited access, because they are quite expensive to put fobs on doors. So you need to really consider where they're necessary. But if you get into storage rooms, bike rooms, and of course, common entry doors, that becomes a lot more worthwhile because, every key that's out there kind of exponentially grows the risk of those keys being lost, copied, people leaving with them. You'll talk a little bit about different mechanical key systems that can help to control that. But over time, they do get distributed and you never really know who has them. And maybe just as importantly, you don't know who's using them. So, when a key is used to open a bike room, there is no way to track or know who that might have been and how many people who've left to have them. Things are changing all the time. And one of the, big changes, a couple of big changes over the last 5 to 10 years are the new laws that require that most stratas allow rentals. So you're typically, as that happens, you're getting a little bit more turnover. I mean, depends on the renter. It's not to paint them all with one brush, but you may get more frequent turnover. Also, I'm noticing with rentals, sometimes there's multiple people sharing the suite just because of costs that's happening. So, wide a number of people coming and going from the building. And so keys tend to get out of control fairly quickly for the building itself. And the other one would be deliveries. I mean, deliveries have just exploded. It's not just Canada Post and, maybe Purolator or FedEx. It's all kinds of delivery companies with all sorts of part-time workers. And it's just made it, more and more common for there to be people around the building, strangers around the building. They're coming into the building, up the floors, in the elevator. And it's harder and harder to, there's more reason to want to control even what happens once somebody gets into a building. They're led into the lobby, but maybe we need to try and contain them more specifically than we used to, just because of the variety of people that are being, bought into buildings for those reasons. So it's, yeah.
And as far as I'm going to come back to CCTV and DVRs in a second, but retrofitting outdated systems, like when you're dealing with a building that's looking to retrofit, can you talk about some of the major expenses that'll be incurred there? Because like we talked briefly about like coring, like it's if they don't run lines, they've got to run lines to these, to the panels, to the fob readers and all that. Can you just talk about some of the major considerations?
Well, it's a big cost impact. And that's why when we would come into a building and look at it with Strata members to determine what doors could be done, should be done, it certainly has an effect when you're looking at, major infrastructure for the wiring to get to different locations. So, there's a component cost for the actual devices that we need to install, setting them up and programming them. And then there's the cost of wiring them all together. There are more wireless or standalone technologies available. They're sort of coming along, but they don't always have all the features or the reliability or the long-term, reliability that you want. So we're a little cautious about them, but that's something that can be considered too when areas are just too difficult to wire. But yes, coring can be very difficult to go into an older building retrofitted. It's not like an office building where there are often, drop ceilings and closets and more ways to get around it. In a residential building, often there's not a lot of ways to run wires. So We
Right.
do encourage when we're dealing with developers on new buildings, even if they don't have the budget to necessarily install the cartridge and all the doors, we do try and encourage them to put in the conduits, to put in that infrastructure
Right.
so that it can be done later. But there's nothing you can do about it. If it's not done, you just have to do the cabling. But it's very, very different for each building, and it's very different for each door. But
Exactly.
it's something that you'll have to consider when looking at pricing. So.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, and it's one thing to share with everybody that's watching, which is as many new buildings as I've dealt with, and as many existing buildings I've dealt with, every single one is different. There are no two that are alike. There are no two that have the same needs. It's all dependent on many of the factors that we've already said: flow and the traffic, the residence where it's built, all these things that are that. And to that point, I was getting to CCTV and DVRs, talking about camera coverage. Obviously we want to aim for common areas, entry points, storage rooms, like in a perfect world. If you're talking about what you want, the coverage that you want, and this might not be what you're able to do, you want your storage covers, at least your access points to storage. It's sometimes all of the parkade to have coverage is difficult, but at least have your entry and exit points. So gate, have your elevator lobbies covered, have your exits covered. But one of the things, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, that we were always told to be cautious of, is make absolutely sure you never have any background that looks into a unit, obviously. And then be careful about background that spills onto a public street. Because one of the things that you get is you get a lot of noise, and you get a lot of things that really don't have anything to do with your property.
So these are some areas where there's been huge advances in CCTV technology the last decade, and especially the last couple of years. That's really making it much more efficient and handle some of those things. So, for example, most good quality current cameras allow you to paint out areas of the picture. So, in a sense, you're getting the camera, and right in the camera, you can sort of black out areas that you don't want to pick up for privacy reasons. And that will just those pixels, that part of the image will never be transmitted out of that camera. So somebody's window, maybe a street area, sidewalk. Those are other things too for Stratus to consider. Once you've got a camera up and it's looking at a sidewalk or a public area, you quite often have the police approach you to ask for footage about something that has nothing to do with the building, but maybe there's a car accident, maybe there's an assault down the road, and they're just looking for broad footage. So, I mean, we want to balance out being good citizens and potentially helping them, but you don't want to overcover, I think, public areas as much as you can. You do want that footage to start right at your property line. But again, it's good now that we can do a lot of that right in the camera to just stop that from occurring right from the beginning, so there doesn't have to be a discussion about it. There's some other things, like, again, different levels of CCTV system. I've been asked at times to provide footage about an event that occurred and remove certain elements from the image after the fact. So if it was a lobby and somebody was accused of, somebody broke in, or it was a delivery person that came in, but in the relevant footage, there was owners or different people in the footage, and they don't want their image shared. A more advanced CCTV system will allow you after the fact to actually obscure certain elements in a picture, to be able to do that. But but there are privacy concerns that need to be respected. I mean, there's privacy laws in BC, and I think there's many reasons to make sure that you're using those systems for the right reasons. It's not for a bit of fun. It's not just to keep an eye on your neighbors. It is for very specific purposes, and that's usually governed by the bylaws.
And that actually is something I'm going to touch on in just a moment. But so we'll move on. Thank you very much for that, Stephen. We've got some more coming on. The next component is a physical component, which is what a lot of older buildings use, which is high security keys. High security keys, and just for those of you that are maybe considering this, high security keys should only be on common doors. I know of one property where, ill-advised, the developer installed high security keys on the unit doors. That is not good. And one of the really important things to understand about high security keys is, although the central component of it is, yes, it is a very difficult, technologically superior key to cut. Usually they have magnets as part of them. The real key, so to speak, with a high security key is that it can only be done by certain signatories. It can only be duplicated by certain signatories that are at the locksmith, that are recorded with the locksmith. So for instance, for certain buildings, only myself and a property manager and a head of council, for instance, would be able to have those keys duplicated. And the problem was when they were put, high security keys were put on a unit for sale, they weren't transferred properly. The next owner all of a sudden is calling a previous owner to get keys copied. So anyway, just an example of a tool in a high security key and to make sure that it's used properly. They're very popular in rental buildings, especially older ones, where retrofitting is not an option, but that is a very good way for key security because the renters are very much beholden to the cost of replacing them. Parkade gate systems. Just to touch on this briefly, parkade gate systems, and again, to bring Steve in, are something that is connected to your access system, but in a lot of buildings, especially smaller ones, where an access system might not have been a cost-effective choice, they'll have a parkade gate that has a programmable fob that has to be programmed by the installer or by the service technician. They would come in and program a bunch of fobs and then give them to you or give them to the property management company to be sold or distributed, however, to the ownership. I'm a huge proponent, obviously, as Steve is, not to be a salesman, of the systems that are connected to the access system, where they have a receiver, and you have a clicker, and it opens the gate, and it goes through the, because the big thing with that is, one, it's controllable through whoever manages your property, whether us or council, and two, there's a record of everybody that uses that gate, same as a fob. So, and in most systems, the clicker is also a key tag fob as well. Now, Steve you have a new system. Sorry, Steve, do you want to add something?
Oh, I was just going to mention a couple of things about those different types of the clicker systems. There's very old ones that are really barely secured at all, that you can more or less, maybe there's only 250 different versions of that clicker. And if people see it's a LiftMaster, they've got some of the old clickers, they can just change the little dip switches on them. And so that's kind of old technology where they're very, they're not very secure at all. Then the next level is when it's a bit newer. So the clickers themselves are more secure, but as you say, you're relying on the company to come and program and delete them. The biggest thing I notice about that, and this occurs in access systems too, is, you get the request to add and add and add and add more clickers, but you never seem to get the request to delete any. Yeah. And it's partially because people don't track them very well. So a lot of I don't even know if some of those systems, they can delete them, but if they were to, they have to know the number of the clicker, which if nobody's recorded, the systems that they have, they don't put names or suite names when they enter them. They just kind of hit a button on their system and go add, and then they hand them over to you. Nobody knows, the system doesn't know who they were. If they get lost, they just get left in. So typically, again, over time, a lot of them go missing. And as you say, there's generally no tracking either of which were used. So, they're convenient, but they're typically a fairly low.
They're limited. Yeah. They're very limited in their. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Parcel locker systems. I'm just going to touch on here, which is very much a new concept. Being a former concierge, I handled a lot of parcels, and it was great because people knew that I had them secure. But the parcel locker systems are fantastic, with one major caveat as far as stratas go, is if you get one, or if you're considering getting one, and there are there's parcel pending, there's another one, I should have it written down, but I forget. If you're considering getting one of these systems, one, they're quite expensive. They can be extremely useful, but you have to have it, or at least I strongly recommend that the system fees are baked into your strata fees. Because once you get it, if it is just set as a sign up, which is, a lot of them are, they're set up as a subscription-based system, nobody's going to subscribe to it. No one's going to trust me. I've seen it where they have these beautiful systems, but because of how they're structured within the strata, somebody's thinking, why am I going to pay a monthly fee to just pick up a parcel? The value of it is really lost. It's got to be covered within the strata fees. Then people don't have to worry. They just sign up. And the great thing is, there's your parcel. Now, I've seen it executed incredibly well in rental buildings. I have a friend who's in a rental building in the States. They have a gigantic parcel pending system. Everything goes through it, and it's just baked into their rent. And everybody loves it. Nothing ever goes missing. It's fantastic. But we'll talk about other because the one big problem with these parcel locker systems is you need a lot of square footage for them. Not a lot of buildings have the appropriate amount of footage. Now, it's also important to differentiate a parcel locker system from a Canada Post locker. Canada Post locker is great, but it's only for Canada Post. Nobody else can use it. FedEx, Purolator, Amazon. Well, Amazon, just as an example, because obviously we're post-COVID and that's where most everything comes from. Amazon uses all kinds of couriers, but only Canada Post can use a Canada Post lockers. So we'll talk about some other solutions for mail areas shortly. Battery backup and generator systems. I just want to speak about this very, very generally, very quickly. Steve, if I'm not mistaken, Cantech, most of the access systems have built-in battery backup in the controllers, right?
They do, but I'm glad you're touching on this because typically they only, they might last for anywhere from sort of 4 to 8 hours.
Right.
And so a lot of newer buildings, even though they have generator systems for long-term, in case there's long-term power failure, they're very stingy about what they connect to them when they're being built. And so it's usually just fire alarms, maybe it's elevators, but often the whole door access system, entry phone system gets left out of the mix. And it's concerning because eventually the system will go down. Now, in fairness, the doors will likely be locked, and then 98% of the doors, when they completely lose power, all battery backup, they're locked. But you don't have any ways of getting into the building anymore. You don't have a mechanical key. And so, I where there are generators, I strongly suggest, because it's very low current, our systems do not draw a lot of power. I strongly suggest that you try to get them hooked up with the backup generator if you have one, just in case we did have. I know we don't get heavy snow here often, but there are times we with climate change and more power outages, buildings could be faced with longer term power outages, and they may not have a plan on how to deal with that if they've never really considered it. So.
Well, and to that point, it's funny that you mentioned that. It's one of the things I was going to say is for those of you that are viewing this on council, if you have a generator and you have a planned power outage coming, or if you have a non-planned power outage coming, take a moment if you're home and walk around the building and see what functions and what doesn't. When I was at my previous building, there was a planned power outage for upgrade. It was going to be at like midnight to 4 a.m. And I made a point of being there because it's the only time that you can test those systems. I can't just say to the building, oh, the power's going to be off today while I check everything that's on the generator. You can't realistically do that because there's no sweep power. The power normally that you see is emergency power in the hallways, emergency drive aisle power in the parkade, usually the gate, usually one elevator, hopefully, as Steve said, the access system. And sure enough, I had to go around and take notes because certain doors weren't on it. We had to get them connected because otherwise people can't get in and out of the building. Okay, so the next one, sorry, Steve, do you have anything else to add there?
No, that's good, Jesse. Thanks.
Great. Culture, the next most important, well, the most controllable piece. And these are, and I apologize in advance, some of these sound very, very basic, and maybe some of them you haven't heard before, but checking doors upon exit, especially rarely used ones. You could literally go weeks in a strata with one of those weird exit doors that goes out of a parkade where somebody doesn't go out of that. I have gotten so used to the sound of a latch clicking behind me, I immediately know when a door closes behind me if the latch didn't catch. But please, I can't. One of the top ways for someone to get into a parkade is follow a car in, if somebody doesn't wait for the gate to close, go to an exit door and tape the latch, and then they just come back at night, and that's it. So checking doors upon exit, obviously extremely important. Always stay aware of your surroundings. I always say that being aware of your surroundings in the building is just remembering that you're responsible. It's your home. If there's somebody outside, don't just assume that they have necessarily good intentions. And it's not to say to judge everyone, but stay aware and alert of your surroundings. Waiting for the gate to close, another old chestnut that everybody has heard a million times. But again, one thing that I noticed going to Vancouver is how many buildings there have sally ports, which I was shocked at. I didn't think they were that common at all. And a sally port is a set of gates where when you enter, there's a second gate and you have to stop in front of that gate, wait for the other one to close. Kind of wish it was more common here, but unfortunately it's not. Reporting any malfunction or damage immediately. Timeliness is everything with this. If you notice something wrong, let us know. And if it's an emergent nature, obviously call our on-call phone, especially things where it's anything that affects a broken entry, anything that affects open entry to your building. Knowing what the difference is between calling the police for a obvious emergency, calling for a non-emergency, and when is it appropriate to call by law for something like urban camping or for a pet control issue, and having those numbers handy. And another is really about tone. If you notice somebody doing something incorrectly, sometimes it can be kind of jolting when a stranger goes, "Hey, you can't do that." Encourage others. If you see someone making an error, not stopping, try to start a conversation about it. I've just found that people can really recoil nowadays when you're trying to directly correct them, even if it's the right thing that you're doing in correcting them. And appropriate signage is another one. One of the things that I'll talk about briefly in a moment is obscuring your storage rooms. But appropriate signage is also things like having on the front door, wait for the door to close. Just reminding people that I've even seen some Stratas put up signs that say, we are not allowed to let anybody in without a fob, to make it extremely clear to people like that you can't come in. And also remembering that as far as culture goes, if you're following somebody in that fobbed in, show them your fob, give them that peace of mind that you're aware, they're aware that you're following them in, but don't worry, I live here too. That's how I can show it.
Mhm.
Now, briefly, just to touch on keys and access. Sorry, that's two at a time. High security versus do not copy versus unsecured. Well, we talked about high security, which are very much controlled by the locksmith, cannot be duplicated except by the people that are on the signature list. But a key that is stamped, a normal security key that is stamped do not copy, really doesn't mean a whole lot. It might, maybe at Canadian Tire they won't copy it, but it doesn't really stop much. And unsecured keys is just a standard key. Now, for the vast majority of the keys, the physical keys you deal with will be unsecured, and that's fine. But it's just a what are they used for? You know, an unsecured key for your unit, it's totally fine because you're the only one that has access to those, or whomever you give them to. But for common doors, high security, we don't really see a lot of do not copy stamped anymore because, again, it really doesn't mean a whole lot unless it's just stamped on a high security key. External versus internal building access. We pretty much already covered this, which is talking about the access flow as far as into your storage rooms and versus exterior. One of the only points that I'll make here is it's very common to have a bolstered exterior access with your fob system, and then inside have keyed doors. I always say that if we have an exterior master, let's say, an interior master should be a separate key. So everything on the interior, but that key can't open any exterior doors. And that way, if it ever goes, we don't have to worry about exterior access. And then your exterior master is guarded very carefully, only as a backup.
I'll just mention there,
yeah.
Jesse, if you don't mind, in terms of those internal doors, you already identified those key areas that we're trying to avoid people getting to, those common areas, parking areas, bike rooms, storage rooms. One thing to keep in mind when you start to look at your building is, as I said, many people get let into the lobby or into the building now. Guests, delivery people, food delivery, you name it, everybody's let into that lobby. So sometimes it's important to look at when someone's in the lobby, whether they've just been let in or whether they're on the way out, which is often the time that they go exploring because now they've done their delivery and they've got, they can choose whether to just leave or have a look around, is looking at trying to secure those areas, from the lobby or from the common areas that lead to those security concerns. So someone is buzzed up onto the 5th floor, they drop off some food for you. They might go down the elevator or they might walk down the hall to the stairwell. And they go down the stairwell. If they follow that stairwell down, depending on building design, it may very well take them down into the parking area. And now they're in that room. So looking at securing the kinds of doors that lead. So you obviously cannot lock people out of the stairwell, but you may be able to lock them out when they get down to that lowest level that they can't go into the parking area. Or sometimes from the lobby, there are also doors that you might be able to secure that lead into other parts of the building. So just looking at the different doors internally, you do have to be careful about not violating fire egress routes, the routes that have been
Yes.
designated for people to be able to vacate the building in an emergency. So it
Yes.
helps again to have someone like yourself, Jesse, or a professional like us or another company take a look at that with you just to help you identify that. But trying to look at all the internal components that lead to the secure areas while keeping in mind fire exiting.
Absolutely. No, that's an excellent point. When to change a lock? I mean, the only point that I was going to make here is the difference between the concern about changing a lock on a suite door when you lose a key versus a common door. What is, if it's a controlled key, do you have to change the lock? And that's, I won't get too much into that now because I'm just a little concerned about time. Keypad suites versus on keypad locks on suites versus common areas. The bigger point here is it's very common nowadays, or at least it was until Airbnbs were outlawed, to have keypad locks on suites. I definitely don't recommend them unless it's a controlled common area, and by that it's something that only council or management or trades would access. Keypad locks on common areas, it's a very cost-effective solution, but it's not terribly secure. And we'll talk about access codes in a moment too. Unit master keys, their benefit and dangers. Again, very briefly, unit master keys, especially in older buildings, are very common. I have a mortal terror of unit master keys, only because I fear and respect them, which is when I dealt with them at the building I was at, I would have it for as long as I needed it, and I would immediately drive it back to Proline safe. I do not want that key in my possession any longer. And that sounds a little crazy, but God forbid in a 185 unit building, a unit master key get lost and you've got to rekey 185 doors. That is the weight that is on that. Certainly one of the recommendations that we have is if you have a unit master key, again, they're a very useful tool, especially for global events such as, filter cleanings, window cleanings, all these kinds of things. But you have to have proper sign-offs from the ownership in order to use it. You have to make sure it's communicated, and you have to make sure it's secure. I highly recommend that unit master keys are not kept on site, that they are locked up with us or in some other manner. And that's about enough about that. Key overrides on fob doors. Very briefly, most fob doors, especially in the exterior, will have a key override. That should only be used in the event of an emergency or by management or by you as council. We'll get to why you would never use a key on a fob door in a second. The last or second last is classroom versus night latch on a common door. These are lock functions. Classroom is you turn it to unlock, it stays unlocked. You turn it to lock and it stays locked. Night latch is you turn the key in and unlock it, and when you pull it out, it automatically relocks. Night latch is what we want to see on most stairwell exit doors so that you don't have to worry about it staying in an unlocked mode. We have had issues where, again, not against code, but an incorrect format was put in. It gets put to unlocked by accident because they didn't know it was classroom and not night latch. And then you have an unlocked common area. And the last one here, this is the last one, floor specific versus all floor access in elevators and stairwells. Briefly touch on this, and I'll briefly ask Steve, which is we are a big proponent at Proline of having all floor well, I don't want to say we're a big proponent of it. We've just seen more trouble caused by floor specific access. And to be clear, that is, you can only access your floor. And that's not to say it's inappropriate, but if you know somebody else in the building, unless they have a fob for your floor, they've got to go to the lobby, you got to meet them or work something out like that. Whereas all floor access with a fob would be you fob and you could access any floor. You still have that layer of security, but at least it's a little more open that you could visit somebody on the second floor when you live on 14. Steve, did you have anything you want to add there?
Well, it is a complex topic. And yeah, when we get into buildings that are going to the next step where they're actually controlling floor access, there are a lot of things to discuss around locking stairwells, leaving stairwells unlocked. I agree with what you said at the beginning that the target is generally not suites. So we're not generally too focused on stopping people from going up. We're stopping them usually from going down. And I recognize that we're speaking to people of all different types of buildings. Some of them don't have a lower parking level. Some of them have outdoor parking. So it's not relevant to everybody. But, you know, one thing I'll just say is if you put a fob system in and you put it in the elevator to stop people from going down to levels they shouldn't be able to get to, it's not any additional cost to have it stop people from going up. But it doesn't have to be floor by floor. You can still say every tenant in the building, they're all tenants, they're allowed to go to any floor they want. That's not really a security risk, but it just means that someone who gets buzzed in the lobby and should go no further than the lobby, they get in the elevator, they can't get anywhere. So they'll typically then just turn around and walk back out because they realize that they're sort of locked out. So yeah, I think the floor by floor, like securing the upper floors and stairwells is a subject. Whether to make that floor by floor or common to all tenants, I agree with you. I don't think I think having it be all tenants can still move through the buildings freely. It's visitors and service providers that are restricted. Yeah, I would agree with your philosophy on that.
That's great. I'm going to, Christy, Catherine, I know I'm running a little long, but I'm going to burn through the next few because they're pretty much just all suggestions. Security services, I'm just going to touch on very briefly. There are some really good local providers like Themist in Western Canada and Paladin. The key is why do you want them on site? What are your needs and what are the services? Mobile patrols where they come in a car and maybe a little bit on foot, quite common. Full on-site security is extremely uncommon unless you have an acute issue, which I'll list in a sec. CCTV monitoring is much more common nowadays. And we found it to be very helpful at some of our downtown sites that have issues. Somebody actively watching the CCTV, communicating with a mobile crew, and they can respond in kind. Reasons for security required basic security, where there's just a requirement based on the needs around that building, the traffic, and what is attracted there. Fire watch is a big one, where you have something that is against code, and you have to have somebody patrolling the building constantly. It's a nightmare, and I hope nobody ever has to deal with that. Compromised exterior access is a substantial one. A broken entry door, a stuck gate, power outage, construction again, but I listed it twice. Continual security challenges is usually one of the more common ones where you've been tested many times and now you're going to need somebody on site, or you're going to need mobile patrols. And open access, there are multiple properties that have a public component, a fully public component, whether it be a square, a walkthrough, and unfortunately having to keep those areas clear is a priority. Important do's and don'ts. Common keys for fob doors, which I touched on briefly, and I'll just say very quickly. Common keys for fob doors should only be in the hands of council, relevant trades at specific times, and management. If you give out a common key for a fob door, you're negating the system. The whole purpose of that system is accountability. And when you give a key out for that door, it doesn't work. Enter phone keyless entry codes. Don't do it. Just don't even think about it. What a keyless coded entry phone is you'll push pound or I think star on some, and then you enter a code and it just unlocks the door. That is no different than giving out a key because there's no control with it. The easier solution for that is just use your phone itself. Everybody has their enter phone programmed to their cell phone. You buzz yourself and let yourself in if that's the case. But keyless, there's no control with keyless entry codes. Leaving anything unlocked, I hate to have to say that. I mean, it's far too common that I deal with all of our footage requests. Far too common that we have that. Being polite versus being safe. Like as I used to say when I was a concierge, you see somebody outside that you don't think supposed to be there and they want to come in, just say, I got a jerk concierge. He's going to give me hell if I let you in. I'm sorry. Being polite can sometimes compromise the safety of your building. Remember that you're perfectly within your rights not to allow access, and educating your guests and family on the needs of your building, on making sure that doors close and gates close behind them. Communicating your concerns about security. Somebody was lurking. There was an issue that you heard about. Something's not functioning properly. The timeliness of that is very important. And again, in absence of a parcel system, the mail area obscuring it in some way. We even had a building where they had a window that reflected to the mail area, and they frosted it so that from the outside you could not see the packages. It's that important to get them out of sight. If they're out of sight, there is no impetus to try to get into your building and steal them, because they don't know they're there. Record your own personal fob and or if you have high security key numbers. My tip that I give to all new owners is lay them out on a table and take a photo of them and make sure you and everybody else in your family has them. That way, when you lose one, you can immediately tell what's lost and we can remove it from you, or your council can remove it from the system. And security, it's very important to remember, security is about making an authorized entry as difficult, noisy, and labor intensive as possible. No building is totally secure, but we're trying to make it as secure as possible, making it difficult.
And Jesse, just while you're very quickly mentioned sort of policies and procedures,
Yeah.
a huge problem is buzzing people in that call on the entry phone. I mean, I'm amazed sometimes we're doing testing at buildings, so we're just trying to call a particular suite just to test that their number's working fine, and all I hear is a pickup and the door buzz open. They don't even say hello.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
people who just let people get buzzed in. People who, if you're not expecting somebody, if you're not expecting a package or a visit, and somebody shows up saying they're from a delivery company or food company, I would just either don't let them in or go down to the lobby and just see who they are. Because even at the last building I lived in, there were people showing up at 10 o'clock at night saying they were from Victoria Police. They'd had an emergency call in the building. They were getting buzzed in. They were not police. They were not dressed like police. And
That's a great point.
No reason to get in. So just, yeah, you don't have to buzz everybody in who shows up at your entry phone. I'll just say that.
Thank you. And sorry, Christy, I know I ran a bit long, but by all means, if you have any questions right now, I can go over this last slide.
That's okay. I figured my face looming in might be the indication it's time for the questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we do have a couple. First one is, can you tell me the true benefit of cameras? With the break-ins that we have had clear photos and provided these to the police. No arrests have resulted. Do you see any arrests or prosecution as a result of these security camera images?
I'll speak to that. Let me just speak to that, Stephen, then you can. And I hear this frustration because I put all of the dossiers together for our company, almost all, at least all that I'm aware of. And yes, unfortunately, the prosecution rate is disappointingly low. I think the best thing to do, what I've normally found, and Steve, I'll let you speak to this, is positioning a lot of them near lights pointed to entries because they're not seen near lights. If they have a light beside it, and if it's in line with an entry where they're coming in, you get a pretty clear face shot. And that's one of the keys. The difficulty is you have to get lucky a lot of times. You have to hope that they don't have their face obscured, get them on a camera before they obscure their face. It's a very fair frustration. I hear that completely.
Yeah.
And the only thing you can do is stay on it. That's all you can do.
Yeah, I mean, never mind giving police documentation. Unfortunately, these days you catch them red-handed and they get arrested and they still rarely get prosecuted. So it's a huge problem. I mean, Jesse, you may feel contrary to this because of knowing better about Strata, bylaws, et cetera. But I often look at CCTV systems as partially just giving you the knowledge of what's happening. A lot of people, when crimes are happening, things are going missing, bikes are vanishing, suddenly neighbors start, oh, the janitor, I think my neighbor upstairs, he looks a little odd to me. It's probably him. I saw him in there the other day. It just allows you to sort of stop the rumors, stop the accusations, and just get some information. It may not lead to a prosecution, but it will help you too. You'll see their methods. Like, you may not prosecute that person, but you will see, well, how did they get that door open? You'll see how they're doing it. The tools they're using, it allows you to then react, change your strategies, change your physical security. So as I say, unfortunately, it doesn't always end in prosecution, but it can give valuable information. The other thing you touched on was, which is pretty new, is hiring a company to watch certain cameras at certain times of day. The reason this is fairly new is it's really quite new that the cameras now are very good at, they call them analytics. They're able to determine that's a person that's walked into an area, it's a vehicle in an area, it's a bicycle. Some of them
Yeah.
can do loitering analytics, meaning that if someone just passes through, not a problem. If they're standing around for 3 or 4 minutes, they're loitering. Let's take a look at what they're doing. So what this has done is it's just impossible for companies to be looking at hundreds of cameras 24 hours a day. There is no such thing. Nobody does that.
Absolutely.
But what this does is it lets that camera. So let's say it's in a bike room, and you just can tell them, just alert when a person walks into the bike room, or alert when somebody is loitering in this parking area outside the building. It narrows it down, and it can just feed the video to these companies that's relevant. They can look at it, they can assess what's happening. Sometimes there's two-way speech, they can talk to the person. And yeah, so that's another way that cameras now can be used proactively, rather than guards who just kind of appear every once in a while. And it's fairly cost effective, very cost effective compared to hiring a guard company to actually be present. So
I agree.
another use.
Okay. Next question. The parkade entry is still our most vulnerable area, as we have residents who consistently do not stop until the parkade gate is closed. Are there any new systems available to mitigate this behavior? Are there other solutions you're aware of from other buildings?
I've seen some commercial buildings where it's a fairly simple thing, but where the gate company, they'll put in sort of a strobe light that's connected to the gate, and that will be sort of facing, as you're kind of driving in, you'll sort of be looking at it, it'll be flashing there, and it flashes as long as the gate is up. It's just a reminder, or gives people kind of that idea that, I just have to sit and wait for this thing to go down. Signage, as much signage as you can, saying it's your responsibility. A camera in that area can let people know that, again, Jesse, I don't know, that doesn't mean there'll be any consequences. Maybe this isn't allowed by the bylaws, but just to be able to say, well, yeah, we did have somebody follow in, and here's the driver who just blew through and didn't bother waiting. So what you mentioned about the Sally ports, that's the ultimate. It's fantastic. Yeah. Nobody's going to break in and let themselves get trapped between the two gates standing a foot from your car. But that's, it can always be done. But
the one that I'm aware of, and I don't have an explanation yet for why all the gate companies in town don't do this. I do, and I have to name drop because I only know one that does this. It's Dependador. They have a method where they do what's called a quick close. So let's say you have a 10-second open time on your gate. Gate opens, stays open for 10 seconds, but the second that something passes by the electric eye, it'll start closing.
Sure, yeah.
That's we've done that on several buildings downtown. I don't have an answer for why. I brought this to a different gate company, and they looked at me like I'd grown a second head, like they had never heard of it. And I didn't think it was that bizarre.
But it's probably just a new technology. It's just one little feature on a gate controller that it probably just hasn't filtered down to a lot of other people yet. But it's a great one. I exactly understand what it's doing. It's simple, and
it automatically overrides the hold open time, and it starts closing immediately. And the only thing you have to do is you just have to communicate to all the owners, all the residents, that the gate will now start closing immediately. Because if you have somebody behind you that's going to try to follow you out, that gate's kind of come down on them. And it does have a feature to try to stop it, but you're still going to hit it. So, yeah.
Okay. Couple more questions because we're at the very tail end.
I got you.
Our biggest security issue is the transient population seeking shelter and resources.
Yep.
We've had them break into vehicles in our visitor parking, as well as into our parkade to break into vehicles and storage to steal small items from vehicles.
Yes.
Cameras capture the people. Nothing is really done other than to provide that to the police, and no further follow-up. What other things would you suggest? Perhaps motion activated bright floodlights on the parking ramps? Any suggestions?
Well, the first thing I would say, and I'm sure this is going to be cold comfort, but I had particular experience at Tillicum dealing with a gang there, and we had no solutions for this. It was such a pest. And one thing we learned was file reports, constantly. Every time you have an issue, file a report, and I'm sure that you're already doing that. But what happens is when they do reviews and they see how many reports are, it's like a heat map. They'll see that there's a constant issue there at some point and deal with it. At least, hopefully, at least Saanich did when we were dealing with this. The other thing is anything that you can do, and I'm sure that you are, as far as making it a less attractive target. So yeah, floodlights, anything you can do to bolster your gate. You're talking about visitor parking. What were the other points that were brought up? Visitor parking. Getting
And then
cars.
getting into the storage through
Yeah,
the
I mean,
parking.
the one thing we only touched on briefly for time is obviously I'm sure that this person's already done this, which is obscuring your storage, removing the signage completely, bolstering the doors, astragals on the doors, anything you can to make it Fort Knox from the outside. Again, quick close on the gate if that's possible. But the big one for me is when you're having constant, legitimate police issues, file reports, every single thing, file a report for everyone, because it gets to the point where it can't be ignored.
Perfect. All right. And we'll do one more. We have gates that surround our entire complex of townhouses. The front is only 4 feet high and the side and back gates are 7 feet. What is the best way to prevent people from coming through our property? Do many properties like ours lock their gates with a key system? We just have a latch right now that isn't locked.
Yeah, I mean, it's very common for those types of areas to definitely to be locked for sure. It's obviously difficult when you have lower. And one of the things you'll want to check is, was there a caveat, a covenant with the city about how high that was? Because I can almost guarantee you, at least I know, I'm thinking of one property where they wanted to build it higher and they were kept from doing so by the city. And so is there a way around that? Now, again, that's not a cost-effective solution of raising a wall, obviously. But definitely there are options. Talk to, well, email us. Email us. We'll be able to give you some options as far as physically bolstering that. But it's tough when you have, I know what you're talking about. You've got a gate and you've got like a pony wall beside it. And it's like, what is the security there? But yeah, I know some of those were city mandated. And it's just a matter of getting around that.
Excellent. All right. So that brings us to an end. Catherine usually has some wrap up comments, so I'm going to throw it to her to kind of wrap up today's session.
Hey, thanks, Christy. My comments are very brief, just a housekeeping. As I mentioned, we recorded the session and we'll be sending out a link in the coming week. Feel free to share the link with other council members or people you think might be interested in the content. We'll also be posting the recording to our YouTube channel, so you can always find it and past sessions there. And always, as mentioned, if you have any questions or comments, please complete the survey that you'll see pop up when you leave the session, or feel free to reach out to me directly. We're always working on new sessions, so you'll see more information about those in the coming months. And thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Christy. And have a wonderful rest of your sunny spring day.